Hello, welcome to the Evening Standards offices, where our panel today is made up of Ross Russell, who is the editor of the Standards International Multimedia project called Let Girls Learn, which has the Gates Foundation as a partner. We also have Caroline Gammell, assistant editor of The Independent, whose area is particularly working in news, which also includes foreign affairs. Judith Diment, who is the UK Polio Plus National Advocacy Advisor and the chair of the Rotary Representatives to the United Nations and the Commonwealth. Is that correct, Judith? And we have Bella Evidente, who has been an executive with the United Nations and supports charities in London and the UK. Today the topic of the discussion is more broadly innovation, education and change for women in a digital age. But as I say, that is quite wide. So because of the people we have on the panel today, I think we'd like to sort of narrow that down a little bit and focus on the topic of the role of the challenges women are facing working in the media or in politics or policy and non-profit environments. So we can discuss, I hope, whether there's fair representation for women working in the technology and digital side of our respective sectors, and how the media portray women working in these areas. And finally, what more the media can do to help empower women and promote careers in what are often turbulent and challenging times. Ross, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. Do you think that there remains a digital divide? I know you're working in digital with your project. Is there a digital divide in the newsroom or within any projects that you've been involved with? Maybe not so much within Let Girls Learn, but more generally in newsrooms that you've worked in. Do you think the digital divide is still there?
I don't think the digital divide is a gender-based divide now. I wouldn't say. I mean, when I started my career in journalism at Reuters news agency, it was a very male environment, but particularly on the sort of more technical side, with the camera crews and that, they were always 100% male. And I think that's really, really changed over the years. For example, at the Evening Standard, the video team is, well, until last week, 100% female. So
good to hear.
I think that has really changed. I would say the digital divide maybe be more generational now, where older journalists or more senior journalists have to, be really catching up with the younger generation and their, as digital natives of their understanding of how technology works.
You certainly just mentioned me, definitely there. But my daughter is also studying video journalism at Bristol, so it's good to see that the generations are coming through. And I think most of the people on her course are female as well. So yeah, that's good. In terms of foreign reporting, Caroline, would you say that there is still that focus when you send teams out, or you're working with teams in the field or perhaps in war zones or abroad? Do you still feel it's quite a male-dominated environment, as Ross mentioned, in terms of the people behind the camera, the technical teams?
I don't actually. I think there's still more to go. If you look at the example of Belle True, who's our international correspondent, who's been out in Ukraine, she has very much been filming that documentary. She's been behind the camera. She's been involved in the technical side. She's come back. She's been in the editing suite. The whole way along that process, she has been behind the camera and part of the technology, as well as obviously presenting it in the front. And I was thinking about other examples of this. Someone like Anna Foster, BBC, who's recently done the Turkey earthquake. She's been travelling alone, just broadcasting, using just. So I think there are some sort of promising examples of when women are able to do both.
Well, we've always been very good at multitasking.
Indeed.
I think so. And do you think that sometimes helps with the story as well? If there was a team and it was all female, do you think sometimes that's easier to get access to certain families that you might be talking to in war zones?
I think certainly if you're looking at the human toll, I think obviously so the sexual violence victims, say in Ukraine or Afghanistan, they'll be much more comfortable with women who are affected talking to other women. I mean, women reporting and men reporting brings up its own security risks. I think that is still quite a live issue.
And just staying with media for a moment, do you think, technical and digital aside, there is still room for improvement in terms of a digital divide within our newsrooms? And is that at certain levels, or is it have things improved?
I think it is changing. I mean, obviously the Independent is entirely digital now, so everybody has to embrace it. But previous newsrooms that I've worked in, when I was at the Telegraph, there was very much an integration of online and news and newspaper. I think that's really improved over recent years. So I think it is changing, but I think there are a few outliers still yet to integrate.
And in terms of the male-female ratio, depending on which statistics you look at, women are either doing terribly well in journalism and represent 51%. Other surveys say it's lesser. Do you feel the same at the Standard or other newsrooms you've worked in? Do you think there's parity now between male and female colleagues?
Looking around the newsroom, it's always
Really, isn't it? Sometimes you look around.
About parity. Yes, I think the younger the newsroom is, the more likely you are to have parity, and maybe slightly different operations. For example, I worked for some time at the editing desk at Reuters, where people tend to come towards the end of their career, and that's tended to be sort of more heavily male. But I think now, as new starters with these news organisations, I would imagine that there would be parity at least, yes.
And in terms of journalists of colour as well, is that something that your organisations are looking to help improve? Do you know, is diversity important within our newsrooms, and if so, why?
It's definitely important, and both the Standard and the Independent are very aware of that, and it needs to improve because you want to hear voices from different communities. You can't just have it from a traditionally white perspective. And we've been working with various partners to introduce more women journalists into the newsroom with the Aziz Foundation. There's still definitely a lot more that needs to be done. We have Nadine White, who's our race correspondent, but she gets, she has a hard time online. She gets a lot of personal attacks. The battle is still very real.
Yes, something to definitely work on.
Yeah.
I'm going to come over to this side of the room, if that's okay, Judith. So you work in the policy and medical science sectors. So studies, as I think some of the briefing notes that we were sent through from Athena40 showed us, that women and certainly young girls lose interest in STEM subjects around middle school. Do you find that there is a gender balance in the areas that you've worked in?
When I started my career 50 years ago, and certainly most of that time, I would say there wasn't a gender balance. It was very, and I worked in different sectors: academia, museums, public relations, and also the charity sector. And I think what you need to encourage and change the situation with girls taking up STEM is you need really good role models, and you also need the media to promote them. I've often been taken when attending meetings where you have a very inspirational speaker, and it's a woman. And I often take young women to these meetings. I like to support and mentor young women. And it's interesting the impact a really good role model can have on an individual or a young person. And role models are really, really important. But I think as well, having worked on behalf of Rotary International, now for nearly 20 years in global health, I've seen the need to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women, actually in all walks of life. And I think there are certain processes which are common to everybody. It doesn't matter which sector you're in. And I think I would highlight 4 areas which I think are really important, which I've had the opportunity through my career in these areas. So I think it's really important that women support other women, whether they're in business, the media, academia, wherever. That's crucial, and it doesn't always happen. I mentioned role models, but I also think that it's absolutely vital that you have the right training, but you always have to start off with the right education. But the right training is really important. And even more important is continuous learning throughout your career. Never stop learning. Always be curious. That is absolutely vital. Coupled with that is mentoring and the role of mentoring. I was very fortunate in my career at the very beginning to have a wonderful woman mentor who I'm still friends with 50 years later. And then when I moved on, I worked at the Natural History Museum, very science-based organization. I had a wonderful medical mentor there. And you can't really underestimate the importance of mentoring. Because
continual mentoring
yes.
as well. So it doesn't matter how old you are, you can
No.
still find a mentor in your 40s, 50s.
Absolutely. And I think as well, engage with, don't just, if you're a young person, don't just stay with young people. Embrace of the older generation, learn from their experience and knowledge. That's really important. So I think intergenerational mentoring is extremely important. And then the other element I would stress is networking, the importance of networking. We all know that, particularly in the UK, we have the old boys public school networks. Luckily, we have a lot of other networks like Athena and the ones we're talking to today. Networking, I have to say, was the most crucial factor in success in my career. And I would encourage all women to really work at developing their own networks. It does take a lot of time and effort. It means going out for breakfast meetings every morning, going to a meeting after. But you have to make that effort.
And ask for the help that you...
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, if you do make the effort, you might meet somebody 1 year, and then maybe 6 months later, you might get a call from them. They say, oh, I met you at this event. Networking is so important.
And you also mentioned the portrayal of people working in the science industries in the media. So, I mean, we saw lots of people like Jenny Parry's, Sarah Gilbert mentioned during the pandemic. But do you think that the media has more of a, if we're talking about women working in certain sectors, it may be fashion, or it may be, home sciences or whatever it is, rather than science. Do you think the media are now portraying more women or putting up those experts in terms of, so I'm asking the media side over here, do you think that's improving?
I think so. I think it's certainly, but it has to be quite a conscious move
Yes.
to identify.
So coming from the news desk or the editor of the news desk?
I think it still has to be thought about. We put a list together today, but within that was Maggie Adder in Pocock, because she's obviously a hugely influential woman. But even the way that she's portrayed, there was a doll made in her image yesterday, which is great, but which is fantastic, and it's a very sort of populist way of going in, but it's still quite sort of symbolic rather than this is the amazing work she's doing. So it obviously makes news, and it should make news, but it has to be slightly thought about rather than just naturally
conscious.
Yeah,
and then hopefully eventually
exactly. Hopefully it will become second nature.
Bella, if I could ask you about the area that you work in, so it's the charity sector, but also you've worked in politics and in policy, and obviously in recent years we've seen 2 more female prime ministers in the UK. Do you think that they were sort of given a fair chance, and was their sort of downfall, if you like, to do with the policies that they've had in place, or do you think that, as someone that doesn't work necessarily straight in the media, do you think that sexism and misogyny had a part to play in their downfall, especially perhaps with the latter?
Yes. Well, let me start by saying that I have 3 decades working in international development and humanitarian context. And part of my work with the UN, having spent most of my career in the UN system, is to provide upstream policy advice to host governments, and at the same time, empower women as part of one of the development goals of the 2030 Development Agenda. And I would like also to emphasize that the equal participation of women and equal access to opportunities is actually part of the internationally agreed targets set in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So when it comes to the political participation of women, I would say that we haven't really reached our goal of having, equal proportion with men. And at the same time, I think it also goes back to different factors. One of them is also having the gender, the stereotypes where men were preferred to hold leadership positions compared to women, as well as in decision-making processes. So when it comes to also, I would like to mention about some statistics as well, particularly with regard to women in government positions. And in that, as of January 1st, 2023, there are 31 countries, and where 34 women serve as heads of state and of government. And I think that would have included also UK, where we have income minister. So yes, but at the same time, globally, we haven't achieved that the target of having equal representation of women. But I think also what helps in having women now, we are making progress, although it will take a number of years. However, I think in some countries where they have already imposed a quota in the number of seats where women will have to be elected, then I think it's a very good progress.
So that's what I picked up on straight away, is the fact that targets were set.
Yes.
And, would you say setting targets is vital in order to achieve some of these things, not letting it happen by chance?
I would say it's vital as a first step. We always need to have something to start with. And with having this quota, it's good. You have a target, you have a plan. However, very important is to translate that into action. And that is where we are currently lacking at the moment and where we need more efforts. Globally, not only here in the UK.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to you with that question about politics in the UK then, if that's okay. Because I know, tell me about you've been involved in politics as well in Kensington.
No, in Thames Valley.
In Thames Valley, my apologies. Do you think that the portrayal of women in politics in the UK is more of a difficult ride for women than it is for men in the same positions?
I'm not sure it is, but I think it's in the UK we've not had many women in Parliament, and it was Theresa May actually who started Conservative Women to Win, because to get women into Parliament, as Bella said, you need action, and the action you need is supporting them, training them, so that they can get through the selection panels. I remember going to a selection panel and there's one woman and 7 men, and the woman won. So, if you have the training and the support, you can get through, but it's not easy. And of course, also, politics is not easy for women because we get married and we have children, and politics is not a family-friendly career. I think that's another real issue. And childcare in the UK is not as good as it could be. That's another barrier to women rising to the top and taking all of these roles.
Do you think that women get a different level of press interest in politics than men? I think about Theresa May and her kitten heels that she was famous for, or Angela Rayner's legs.
Yes.
Do you think that that's an extra challenge that they have on top of their working day?
Absolutely.
That perhaps men don't have the same scrutiny in terms of their appearance, which is perhaps something we all need to consider further. Everything we've talked about, and Laura, if I can come back to you, what role do you think men have to play in supporting women in the sectors that we've discussed today?
Yes, very important actually is, as what most people say, it takes 2 to tango. And women actually perform better when they work also with men. And very important, in my experience actually in working with various countries in challenging contexts, is that men play a very vital role in empowering women in terms of basically by having first the awareness of what are the different needs and what are the different impacts of such actions, on towards women. And if men are fully have full understanding of the different needs and roles of women, as well as respect the contributions of women to society, then that's a very good motivating factor. They create an enabling environment by doing that. Secondly is the support. Yes, there are certain gendered sensitivities when it comes to social norms. However, very important is to allow women to have decision-making leadership in such, not only at home, but in the society, in the community as well. And my experience with that particularly is in disaster risk reduction, where women actually don't have a role in decision-making when it comes to disaster response. When in the first place, they are the most hardly hit because they look after their children, they look after their parents or the aging members of their community. So different needs of women should be fully understood by the men, and they also should recognize the different contributions of women that we make to this.
Recent, there aren't many female reporters in sport. I think we all are aware of that. Do you think that men within newsrooms or media organisations can do more to support women in their careers in terms of however they see their career or their life going, whether or not that's maternity leave or whether or not that's making sure that the job is there when you come back from maternity leave? Do you think that the media that men and women work well together in the media? Would you say? I'm going to ask you first.
I do, and I think it's so important within a newsroom that you have both voices, because a female perspective is just needed on big stories. It just is, in the same way that a male perspective is. You need both, and I think people do work well, and I think, Ross, you probably find this as well with the younger journalists coming through, certainly the younger men journalists coming through. They're not thinking so much male female. They're much more. It's much more inbred and much more intuitive within them. But I still think within the media there are some strongholds of male-dominated areas. I think you're right. I think sport is definitely one of them. I think politics is hard. Business is another one. But there are some very strong female characters within that. But they are the exception that proves that rule. So I think within general news, certainly in our newsroom, it's parity and people start very much on a level, but when you get specialising, I think there are still really strong.
Yes, maybe it's going back to those targets again that we need to set. Would you agree with that, Kai?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think in a newsroom has to reflect the society that it's reporting on. And for example, in London, I think nearly half of Londoners are from a BAME background. So, and I don't know what the proportion is, but a large number of Londoners weren't born in the UK or weren't born in London at least. So I think the newsroom has to reflect that, and within that, reflect different, gender, LGBT, and have that diversity. But I think Caroline's right with the younger journalists. They really don't see that so clearly. So I don't think
They've not experienced anything different, I
looking
suppose.
for a male champion in their newsroom. They would expect it, and I think it's important that not only women report on women's issues, but men can report on women's issues. Straight people can report on LGBT issues. In my last place of work, we had a straight man who was running a news stream called Openly, which was about LGBT issues, which sounds ridiculous, but it actually wasn't. It was a step forward, and so yeah, I think it is all about diversity and with our sources really reaching to look for sources and to speak to people who maybe otherwise, are usually on the first port of call when you're reporting a story.
And it's great to hear that things are certainly improving in terms of the media. Obviously, some areas still need to be worked on, but that's great to hear. There was a question that had come through from the forum about unconscious bias, and whether or not any unconscious bias, perhaps in areas that you work in, whether or not that leads women to actually doubt their own abilities. Would you have you any experience of that, or do you think that's the case?
With the work that I do at Rotary International Global Health, we've developed with our partners a gender strategy. And one of the aspects is unconscious bias. And we're actually running training sessions on unconscious bias, which actually I'm really interested in, because you think that you're not biased. In fact, when you go to a training course on unconscious bias, it's there, and it's really important.
I'm going to go back to the overall theme, if that's okay, about the STEM fields that Athena40 are discussing today. I think it's great that we've looked at our own areas. But the UK government, and looking at the UK specifically, the UK government wants the UK to become a science and technology superpower, they've announced. How can each of our sectors support and encourage women to get more into the STEM fields? So we've already talked about more representation and mentoring, but what more can we do as women to promote more women to get into the STEM? And it goes right back to those young children that we talk about that fall out of love with STEM subjects in junior schools. So Bella, is there anything more we should be doing?
Yes, I think important, first of all, is data gathering. I mean, we need to have statistics. We need to understand what's going on, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And second is in promoting technology, innovation, and digitalization, it's important to embed gender considerations in technology development. And this entails participation of women and their recognition as creators, as designers and promoters, as well as decision makers in the fields of digital technology. So that's one thing. The second is, I mentioned earlier, the leveraging the data, but very important is to leverage data science to advance gender equality in this field as well. And this means working together across all sectors, which means collaboration between the private sector, the business sector, academia, media, public sector, development actors, and international organizations in order to collect, analyze, and use the data productively and feed into the decision-making processes of how we move forward with promoting gender equality in technology and innovation. And I would say the third also is having the gender impacts of artificial intelligence and also safeguards to regulate those new technologies, as well as mitigate risks and protect the rights. And as what we've mentioned, well, I would say that with regard to the artificial intelligence professionals globally, unfortunately, women make up only 22% as of present. So there's still a long way for us to achieve that equality. And I would say also gender parity, because it's not only working in the sector, but also having a decision and leadership role in the sector.
Thank you. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely. No, I agree with everything that Bella says. I just add as well, I think the things like UK Innovate are really good initiatives for creating good opportunities for men and women, actually. But it's great, you know, people take advantage of it, being supported by government schemes. But I'd also add that we need to bear in mind as well that the gender barriers are operating with are affected by other barriers such as socio-economic background, age, disability, ethnicity, and culture. And you need to take those things into account as well.
And funding, because I've read statistics that, you know, much of the funding comes from boards that are predominantly run by men. So it would be great to see more women working in the funding and the finance side of things, which might sort of help towards that.
And also, I think, encouraging women to take up positions on committees and boards of all scientific institutions. because they tend to be pretty dominated by men. It is changing, but more effort could be made.
Right, that's an interesting point. Do you think days like International Women's Day and just generally talking more are important to continue doing, Ross? Things like today, but should we be doing more?
Yes, every
of
day should be
talking?
International Women's Day. But also, I wanted to make a point on the issue of girls in science and women in science, is that one thing that we're focusing on in this series for the Evening Standard is girls and women as climate leaders, because one of the most powerful ways of tackling climate change is investment in girls' education. And I think that's one area, particularly for girls in this country and globally, that is incredibly inspiring for them, that they can play a role in tackling climate change. And the reason why there's a strong correlation between those two things is because girls, they tend to take things back to their communities. Like, they're most affected by climate change, and if they study in climate smart agricultural or field like the new techniques, they're the ones most likely to sort of be implementing those techniques and those skills.
And again, would you go back to one of our initial points about role models? Would you say that role
Yes.
models therefore are very important, because those young girls that you're talking about, if they see someone like them that has done well or has made a difference, they can take those stories back. So is it our responsibility in the media to report more, as we said, but it's about having role models and people to look up to, which I think you raised initially.
Well, Greta Thunberg's the obvious
Yes,
role model,
but I would imagine
but-
there must be many
but
more
there's
as well.
so many more, and I think we have made an effort to sort of showcase some of those other activists and climate leaders, especially, who are young women who are doing incredible things all over the world.
And communicating with those people on the channels that they want. So you picked me up at the beginning by saying it's multimedia, it's not just video, but that means talking to them on different social media platforms.
That's right. Yeah, in fact, the TikTok element of our project has been the most successful element, which wasn't what we were expecting. But that's good, because we're reaching a
TikTok's
different
very
different demographic.
Great. I think we might be running out of time, but I am just going to ask you about, is that right, with 5-10 minutes, haven't we? I just want to ask you, going back again about if in a year's time, what would you like to see? What would you like to have changed in a year's time, Bella, if we meet again here in 1 year, and it particularly in your own field? What would you like to have seen in a year, or perhaps in 5 years' time? Maybe a year is too soon to make all these huge changes, but in a year or 5 years.
Yes, well, I have been an advocate of sustainable development, and particularly on Goal 5 on gender equality, Goal 11 on sustainable communities, and also on Goal 13 on climate change. So I would love to see really much progress in those areas. We are still behind achieving the goals, and we're already, I would say 7 years before reaching the target of 2030. So I would love to see a world that is resilient to climate change impacts, as well as sustainable peace and lasting development across the world.
Perfect. We all hope for that. Judith, in terms of, we haven't talked about your polio project either, but or initiative, but
Well, one of the hopes we have for this year is that we stop transmission of the wild polio virus. We've now been 5 months without any polio anywhere in the world. So we are on the brink of eradicating it. And Rotary International started it in 1985.
and are there some amazing female scientists behind, or
There are,
working in
more
this field?
importantly, there are 80% of the health workers in the polio program, and we vaccinate 400 million children a year. 80% of the health workers are women. And that's why, of course, we developed the gender strategy, transgender equality strategy. I'd also like to make one more, a further point. I agree with regarding SDG 5, we need to be working towards that and seeing progress with that. And of course, with the COVID pandemic, progress with the SDGs has slowed down. But SDG 5 is actually also dependent on SDG 3, which is health. Because without health, you've got nothing. And that's, polio program is part of that. But it's much more than the polio program. It's also helping to strengthen health systems in underdeveloped countries. And we're making enormous progress there. And so by the end of 2023, by this time next year, I'd like to think we're on track to certifying both polio free, and that we have much greater gender equity around the world.
Because illness is something that particularly affects women, doesn't it? As mostly as the caregiver. So if you have a child who's ill, that falls on the women's shoulders very much, doesn't it? Thank you. The same question to you. In terms of foreign reporting, I mean, obviously we've got the massive challenges of the war in Ukraine, which I'm sure we would all like to see over within a year at the least. But there are challenges around the world and terrible situations happening throughout the globe. Obviously we all want world peace, but in terms of reporting on those things, are there any sanctions that you'd like to see eased, or any restrictions on reporting that you would like to see lifted?
I mean, in an ideal world, you would obviously have the freedom to go wherever you can, and that is one of the biggest problems. It can be prohibitively difficult to get into regions to really find out what's going on.
I'll get into Russia at the moment.
But get into Russia, exactly, to get into parts of Afghanistan, to really sort of push under and see what's going on, and to see how the whole world is so interconnected. Thinking about food and the war in Ukraine and the wheat problem and the floods in Pakistan, everything is so joined up. So it is still very difficult to get to some of those areas. So to try in this ideal world to be able to get where you can to find out what's going on.
And disinformation is obviously.
Disinformation, exactly. Disinformation, and also the abuse people get online when they report on things or highlight things, and the very dangerous targeting people for being brave enough to go and report in these areas and on really dangerous and controversial things. And clearly the danger in Afghanistan for women is, we all know how bad that is. But still people are brave enough to speak out and have their voices heard. So the elimination of fear, I have that.
Yeah, that's a good one. And as the voice of youth today.
Thank you. Well, working on this project has really made me understand how important girls' education is, and how many millions of girls around the world don't have access to education, but what a difference that investment can make. So my wish would be that all girls, I mean, obvious examples in Afghanistan where girls are not being educated at the moment, that all girls around the world will have. But if in other countries it's for reasons of poverty or tradition that they're not being educated, but for all girls to have an access to education.
Thank you. Doug, scribbling away. Thank you very much. From my point, I think we definitely are at time now, and I think we have to hand back now. It's a 10-minute walk, so that would make it 2:20. We have to hand back.
But is everybody happy with what they've covered?
Is there anything else any of you would like to add? Copies notes over there.
I think what you were saying about how to get young women more involved in STEM, I think those opportunities, the careers talks at schools, and it goes back to such an early stage to have a more diverse range of these careers and these jobs being thought about in a much earlier stage. I think would be hugely important too.
Having a feel like there's a huge lack of science teachers, full stop, aren't there? Let alone female science teachers. So we're always told that you're really impressed by your favourite teacher. And so if we could get more science teachers, that's going to make a start in terms of the person that taught you that subject was a woman. Yes, there's lots to be done.
Something else I think is important is warning young women that, well, I'm men actually, but young women, that what they put on the internet, social media, is they should realise that anyone anywhere in the world can see it. It might sound obvious, including future employers, because a lot of employers these days, if you send in a CV, they immediately go to your LinkedIn, your TikTok, your Instagram, and there's photographs of you there. on a drunken binge night out with your mates is not the right initiative they're looking for.
Yes.
And I don't think our young people are really aware of it.
I hope they do some education on that at school as well as sort of parents talking to them. I know I've got 2 children myself and I'm constantly harping on at them, but yes, I know it's a different time, isn't it? You know, you can't change your name and move on. It's there forever, isn't it? Your digital footprint forever. Frightening. Thank you. I think